The defendant sat inside of the lobby, in a chair, socializing, engaging in conversations, speaking to other patrons, helping another mother watch her child for over 2 hours while Amillio perished in the car, while Amillio burned from the inside out.
The courtroom falls silent as the prosecutor rises, preparing to play a piece of evidence that will shatter the defense's entire narrative. On trial is 20-year-old Maya Hernandez, and the stakes couldn't be higher. She faces second-degree murder charges, involuntary manslaughter, and 2 counts of child cruelty in connection with the death of her 1-year-old son, Amillio Gutierrez, who died from hyperthermia after being left in a scorching vehicle outside a Bakersfield medical spa.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today because on June 29th, 2025, the defendant, the biological mother to Amillio and Mateo, the one person who was supposed to protect, supposed to put her 2 sons above everything else, chose herself. On that day, June 29th, 2025, the defendant chose vanity. She chose her appearance over her sons. And that choice cost Amillio his life.
But this wasn't a case of a forgotten child. According to prosecutors, this was a deliberate choice. A choice that would cost one baby his life and strip another of his brother. The events of that scorching June day began 100 miles away in Visalia, California, where Maya Hernandez lived as a single mother working as a certified nursing assistant. At just 20 years old, she was the sole provider for Amillio, then 1 year and 20 days old, and Mateo, who was 2. Both boys were full-term births with no defects, and by all family accounts, Maya ensured they were fed, hydrated, and cared for. But on this particular day, Maya had an appointment, a cosmetic procedure at Always Beautiful Medical Spa on South Real Road in Bakersfield. Around noon on June 29th, Maya loaded the boys into her gray 2022 Toyota Corolla Hybrid and made the 2-hour drive from Visalia to Bakersfield. That morning, she'd fed them fruit cups and bananas for breakfast, sandwiches and fruit for lunch. Throughout the day, they had access to milk, water, and juice. She arrived at the spa around 1:10 p.m. At approximately 1:30 p.m., Maya entered the building briefly to check on the status of her appointment, then returned to the car. The boys were sleeping in their rear-facing car seats. She made a decision. Instead of bringing them into the air-conditioned lobby where they'd been welcomed, Maya left them in the vehicle. She started the engine, set the air conditioning to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and hid the keys under the driver's seat. What Maya didn't know, or chose to ignore, was a critical feature of her hybrid vehicle. If the shift lever stays in park for 1 hour without the brake pedal being depressed, the car automatically shuts off.
Before she went into the business, Ms. Hernandez left her keys under the seat. The car was running. The air conditioning was on.
At around 2:05 p.m., surveillance footage captured Maya entering the medical spa. What she expected to be a quick 15-minute procedure would turn into over 2 hours inside the building. But it's what comes next that truly devastates the defense's story. Throughout her interviews with police, throughout her attorney's opening statements, Maya Hernandez maintained one crucial detail. She only expected to be inside the spa for 15 minutes. A quick procedure, in and out, that's what she told detectives. That's what her lawyer repeated to the jury.
Ms. Hernandez went into the business around 2 p.m. for what she thought was a 15-minute medical procedure.
And here's where the prosecution's case becomes damning. The procedure itself, later revealed to be not lip fillers as initially reported, but a liquid Brazilian butt lift, took only 15 to 20 minutes. Spa employee. Testimony confirmed that the actual injection procedure was brief and non-invasive. So what was Maya doing for the remaining hour and 40 minutes?
She drove here to an elective cosmetic procedure, a procedure to enhance her looks. And ladies and gentlemen, when she drove here, she knew that she could bring the boys, Amillio and Mateo, into the appointment with her. She knew they were welcome. She knew they could wait inside the air conditioning, but she chose to leave them in the car. She chose a break.
But when the prosecution played the surveillance footage from that day, when they called the spa injector to the stand, when they laid out the timeline minute by minute, a very different story emerged. The procedure itself lasted only 15 to 20 minutes, just as she claimed, but Maya Hernandez didn't leave after 15 minutes. She didn't leave after 30 minutes. She stayed inside that air-conditioned spa, chatting with other clients, scrolling through her Apple Watch, socializing about 4th of July plans for nearly 2.5 hours while her children slowly cooked alive in a car that had shut itself off. The footage revealed something else prosecutors found significant. Maya had deliberately chosen a seat facing away from the window, positioning herself in a part of the spa where her vehicle could not be seen. Between 2:05 p.m. and 4:30 p.m., she never once got up to look out the window. She never once exited the building to check on her sons. Here's what makes this case so disturbing. Maya Hernandez didn't have to bring her children at all, and even if she didn't have to leave them in the car. Days before the appointment, she had texted the spa's injector asking if she could bring her kids inside. The response was clear and welcoming. "Sure, if you don't mind them waiting in the waiting room, hun." The spa's lobby was child-friendly. Other clients brought children. There were toys. There was even a dog. She had permission. She had an option. She chose not to use it.
From approximately 2:05 p.m. to 4:30 p.m., the defendant sat inside the building at 31 South Real Road. You will see this is a office building type situation. There's a lobby, and then there are rooms where the procedures occur. The defendant sat inside of the lobby in a chair, socializing, engaging in conversations, speaking to other patrons, helping another mother watch her child for over 2 hours while Amillio perished in the car, while Amillio burned from the inside out.
Around 2:04 p.m., surveillance cameras captured Maya Hernandez walking into the spa. She was alone, no stroller, despite having one in her trunk, no children. She took a seat in the waiting area, positioned facing away from the windows where her car was parked. The procedure itself went quickly. Between approximately 2:30 and 2:50 p.m., she received her liquid Brazilian butt lift injections. 15 to 20 minutes, just as advertised. Had she immediately returned to her car after the procedure, her sons might have survived. The vehicle's auto shutoff likely hadn't engaged yet. The air conditioning would still have been running, but Maya Hernandez didn't leave. The video shows her sitting in that lobby for the next hour and 40 minutes. She chatted with other clients. She talked about 4th of July plans. She mentioned having 2 children, though she never said they were waiting in the car outside. She checked her Apple Watch repeatedly, at least 10 times, according to prosecutors counting the footage. The watch displayed the time clearly on its face. She knew how long she'd been inside. She never got up to check the window. She never walked outside to look at the car. She never went to see if her children were okay. Meanwhile, outside in the parking lot, something catastrophic was happening. Approximately 1 hour after Maya entered the spa around 3:10 p.m., the Toyota Corolla's safety system detected sustained inactivity and automatically shut down the engine. The air conditioning stopped. The interior temperature, which had been maintained at a comfortable 60 degrees, began to climb. To understand just how quickly and how dangerously this happens, Bakersfield Police Department detectives conducted a meticulous recreation of the conditions on July 2, 2025, just 3 days after Amillio's death. They selected a day with nearly identical weather conditions. They drove the same amount of time from Visalia to Bakersfield. They parked in the exact same spot at the spa. They shut off the engine at the exact time the auto shutoff would have engaged. They placed calibrated thermometers inside the vehicle and inside a car seat matching Amillio's. The results were horrifying. With the air conditioning running, the interior stayed around 80 degrees. But after the shutoff, the temperature began rising at a rate of 19.4 degrees in just 15 minutes. By the time Maya finally returned to check on her children, the internal temperature had reached 116 degrees Fahrenheit. For context, the human body begins to fail when its core temperature exceeds 104 degrees. That's when organs start shutting down, when the brain begins to swell, when death becomes not just possible, but likely. And these weren't adults with fully developed thermoregulation systems. These were babies. The forensic pathologist who later testified explained why 1-year-old Amillio died while his 2-year-old brother survived. Babies around 1 year old don't have fully developed sweat glands. They literally cannot release heat from their bodies the way older children and adults can. Amillio, strapped into his rear-facing car seat, had no way to cool himself, no way to escape, no way to regulate his body temperature as it climbed higher and higher. Around 3 hours p.m., a spa client named Ian Blue went outside to walk his dog. He passed by Maya's vehicle in the parking lot. He noticed it appeared to be off. There were no signs of activity inside, no visible movement. The windows were tinted, making it difficult to see clearly. But it was so unbearably hot outside that Ian actually cut his dog walk short and brought the animal back inside the spa for water. As prosecutors would later point out, Ian wouldn't keep his dogs in the same temperature that the defendant left her babies. Inside that sealed vehicle, two small children were fighting for their lives. Mateo, the older brother, was flushed red, drenched in sweat, his body desperately trying to cool itself. Amillio, too young to sweat effectively, was absorbing the heat with nowhere for it to go. His brain was beginning to swell. His lungs were filling with fluid. His small body was shutting down, organ by organ. And inside the air-conditioned spa, their mother sat in a lobby chair, checking her watch, chatting about holiday plans. At approximately 4:30 p.m., nearly 2.5 hours after entering the spa, Maya Hernandez finally stood up and walked outside. But even then, she wasn't going to check on her children. She was going to retrieve her phone from the car so she could pay for her procedure using Apple Pay. What she found when she opened that car door would haunt everyone who heard about it. Amillio was unresponsive, convulsing, foaming at the mouth. His lips were blue and purple. His skin had a bluish tint. His tongue was swollen and discolored. He wasn't breathing on his own. His little body was limp. Mateo, the 2-year-old, was bright red, soaked in sweat, lethargic and weak. A nurse who later treated him at the hospital said he looked like he was about to have a stroke. Here's where the testimony about Maya's behavior becomes particularly disturbing. A spa employee who had been working that day, Isabel Carrion, testified that she went outside about 15 minutes after Maya had left. She found Maya sitting in the driver's seat with Amillio on her lap. The baby looked red and overheated. But according to Carrion's testimony, Maya didn't appear to be reacting with any urgency. She wasn't crying, she wasn't yelling, she wasn't calling for help. Carrion had to tell Maya to bring the baby inside for first aid. That's when she noticed the second child in the back seat, also in distress. Carrion grabbed Mateo and carried him into the spa herself. Even then, witnesses testified that Maya waited approximately 15 minutes before calling 911, 15 precious minutes while spa staff applied wet towels to Mateo's head and neck, trying to bring down his temperature. 15 minutes while Amillio grew colder, his small body past the point of return. When paramedics finally arrived, they found a scene of absolute horror. Amillio had no pulse. He wasn't breathing. His lips, feet, and hands were blue. He was limp and lifeless. Emergency personnel immediately began performing CPR and rushed him to Adventist Health Bakersfield. When Amillio arrived at the emergency room just after 5 p.m., his internal body temperature was 107.2 degrees Fahrenheit. To put that in perspective, that's 3 degrees past the point where the human body begins catastrophic failure. A registered nurse who treated him, Gabrielle Long, later testified about his condition. He arrived intubated with no pulse. His skin was pale with a bluish tint. He was unconscious. His small body had been fighting an impossible battle for over an hour. Doctors and nurses worked desperately for more than 40 minutes, trying every intervention in their arsenal to bring this baby back. But they were fighting against physics, against time, against organ damage that had already cascaded beyond repair.
And on June 29th, 2025, Amillio was pronounced deceased at 5:48 p.m. at 1 year and 20 days old. He was pronounced deceased so that his mother, the defendant, Maya Hernandez, could obtain cosmetic procedures so she could work on her appearance. That is why we are here today, ladies and gentlemen. That is why Amillio is not here. So she could work on her looks instead of working on being a parent.
Amillio Gutierrez was pronounced dead at 5:48 p.m. on June 29, 2025. He was 1 year and 20 days old. The forensic pathologist who performed his autopsy determined the cause of death was hyperthermia, commonly known as heat stroke, due to being left in the vehicle. The manner of death was ruled accidental in the medical sense because there was no evidence Maya intended to kill her child, but the circumstances were anything but accidental. The autopsy revealed the full horror of what had happened inside that car. Amillio's brain had swollen, his lungs had filled with fluid, his organs had begun shutting down one by one as his body temperature climbed past survivable limits. The pathologist compared the interior of the car to a greenhouse, with UV light entering through the windows and heating up everything inside the closed space, with no way for the heat to escape. Mateo, the 2-year-old, survived. His body temperature when he reached the hospital was 99 degrees, elevated but not deadly. The nurse who treated him, Elizabeth Bond, testified that while he was lethargic and sweaty, he was fundamentally okay. His more developed sweat glands had saved his life, allowing his body to cool itself just enough to survive. He was initially placed in protective custody, but was later returned to family members. That evening, Bakersfield police officers took Maya Hernandez in for questioning. The interview that followed would become crucial evidence in the trial. In the first interview, conducted just hours after her son's death, Maya appeared subdued and exhausted, wrapped in a gray blanket. She was soft-spoken, not openly crying at first, though she would break down later. Detectives read her Miranda rights. She waived them voluntarily and began to tell her version of events. She explained that she had arrived at the spa around 1:10 p.m. and briefly went inside to check on her appointment. She said she sat in the car until about 1:30 p.m., then was called back in for paperwork around 2 p.m. She claimed she believed she would only be inside for 15 to 20 minutes. She said the boys were sleeping and she didn't want to wake them. When asked why she left them in the car, she said she had left the air conditioning on and believed the hybrid vehicle would stay running. She told detectives she had slept in the car before and thought it would remain cool and safe. But when detectives pressed her on the timeline, inconsistencies began to emerge. She claimed her Apple Watch had died, which was why she didn't know how long she'd been inside. Yet surveillance footage would later show her checking that watch multiple times. She said she couldn't remember every detail of what happened, that she was confused about the timeline. When asked about discovering the children, she said she found them with red cheeks and that Amillio had started shaking. Because Mateo had experienced seizures before, she thought Amillio was having a seizure. She said she pointed the air vents toward him, grabbed her phone to call 911 and went inside to seek help. Then came the moment detectives told her Amillio was dead. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. She hung her at the head and began sobbing uncontrollably. "He's dead. He's dead," she repeated. The grief seemed genuine, overwhelming. She immediately asked if Mateo was okay and if her sister could be with him. Through her tears, she said something that prosecutors would later use to try to humanize her. But that also revealed her state of mind. "This is not me. Everything I work for, everything I do, is for them." But there was more to come. In a second interview conducted after her arrest, detectives pushed harder on what Maya knew about the dangers of leaving children in hot cars. This is where her background as a certified nursing assistant became legally significant. Maya admitted she had heard news stories about children being left in cars. She acknowledged understanding what could happen. Her CNA training had covered heat-related illnesses, patient safety, care for all ages, including children. She knew the risks. She had the knowledge. She had been taught about hyperthermia, about how quickly small bodies overheat, about how deadly extreme temperatures can be. When detectives asked her why she did it anyway, knowing these dangers, she responded, "I didn't think it would happen to her." When pressed on why she left them despite the risks, she said, "What happened, I guess? It's not like I left them in there just to die." She insisted through tears. But prosecutors would argue that intent wasn't necessary for the charges she faced. Conscious disregard for a known risk, that was enough. Maya Hernandez was arrested on July 1, 2025, 2 days after Amillio's death. Initially, she was charged with involuntary manslaughter and child cruelty, with bail set at over $1 million. But as investigators reviewed the evidence, as they watched the spa surveillance footage and conducted their temperature recreations, as they analyzed her police interviews and the timeline of events, the Kern County District Attorney's Office made a decision. They would pursue second-degree murder charges. The legal standard for second-degree murder in California doesn't require premeditation or intent to kill. It requires implied malice, which is defined as intentionally committing an act where the natural and probable consequences are dangerous to human life, where the act involves a high degree of probability that it will result in death, and where the defendant knows the act is dangerous but deliberately acts with conscious disregard for human life. Prosecutors argued that Maya Hernandez's actions met every element of this definition. She knew about hot car dangers from her training and from news stories. She had been offered the option to bring her children inside. She chose to leave them in a vehicle she knew would heat up dangerously. She stayed inside for over 2 hours, checking her watch repeatedly, fully aware of how much time was passing. And even after the procedure was done, she lingered to socialize rather than checking on her children. That, prosecutors contended, was implied malice. The trial began on December 8, 2025, in Kern County Superior Court. The prosecution's opening statement, delivered by prosecutor Stephanie Tacconi, was devastating in its detail and emotional impact.
This case is called The People vs. Maya Hernandez. But we are here today because of two young boys. 2 babies. One lost his life and one lost his brother. We are here because of 1-year-old Amillio Gutierrez and 2-year-old Mateo Gutierrez. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today because on June 29th, 2025, the defendant, the biological mother to Amillio and Mateo, the one person who is supposed to protect, supposed to put her 2 sons above everything else, chose herself. On that day, June 29th, 2025, the defendant chose vanity. She chose her appearance over her sons. And that choice cost Amillio his life.
Taccone walked the jury through every choice Maya had made that day. She showed them the text message where the spa said, "Yes, bring your children inside." She described the stroller in Maya's trunk that could have brought both boys into the air-conditioned waiting room. She detailed the 2.5 hours Maya spent inside, the spa surveillance showing her checking her watch over and over, the casual conversations about holiday plans while her children baked in 116-degree heat just yards away.
She did not leave that building a single time between 2:05 p.m. and 4:30 to check on her sons. She chose to ignore all of her responsibilities. She ignored the fact that she had children that day.
The defense's opening statement, delivered by Assistant Public Defender Terrell Wakeman, took a very different approach.
This is an incredibly sad case about a 20-year-old mother of 2, a car, and a terrible, awful mistake. But it's not about murder.
Wakeman acknowledged his client's guilt on the lesser charges right from the start. He told the jury he would be conceding involuntary manslaughter and child endangerment. But murder? That was a bridge too far. This wasn't malice, he argued. This was a tragic error by a young, inexperienced mother who genuinely believed her car would stay running with the air conditioning on. He emphasized that Maya had fed her children, given them drinks, left them snacks and entertainment. These were the actions of someone who cared about her children's comfort, not someone with conscious disregard for their lives. She simply didn't know about the auto-shutoff feature, and at only 20 years old, barely an adult herself, she made a terrible mistake that would haunt her forever.
1, there's no black box information in this case, and what I mean by that is that the car's data recorder cannot provide any on-off times for the engine relevant to this case. And number 2, law enforcement verifies with Toyota mechanics that the car shuts off after an hour if the shift lever stays in park.
What Hernandez didn't know, Wakeman told the jury, was that this built-in function would shut her car off while she was inside. She expected to be gone for 15 minutes. The procedure ran behind. She stayed in the waiting room too long, and when she discovered something was very wrong, she freaked out.
In her own words, Ms. Hernandez starts freaking out, and she initially believes that Amillio's having a seizure because Mateo had a seizure once before, and to her it looked the same.
Wakeman emphasized that Maya called 911 twice, attempted CPR under dispatcher guidance, and brought Amillio to the spa's nurse for help. These were not the actions of someone who'd intended harm. During cross-examination, the defense challenged key prosecution witnesses. When spa employee Isabel Korean testified about Maya's apparent lack of urgency, Wakeman pressed, "Did Hernandez immediately act when you told her to take her baby inside?" Isabel admitted she did. Wakeman questioned whether Isabel's own emotional distress that day might have colored her perception of Maya's demeanor. "This was an upsetting day for you, wasn't it?" he asked. "Correct," Isabel confirmed. The defense also attacked the credibility of the police recreation. Wakeman pointed out that the test was conducted with only 1 car seat and no occupants, conditions that didn't reflect reality. Would the presence of 2 children and their body heat have altered the results? Were there control groups? Had meteorological experts been consulted? Detective Dean Barthelms admitted they hadn't used outside experts due to time constraints. They'd wanted to match the weather conditions as closely as possible to June 29th. He also acknowledged they couldn't put actual people in dangerous heat for a recreation, but he maintained the test aligned with published studies on hot car temperatures. Wakeman's closing theme was clear. Maya Hernandez was a young mother who made a catastrophic error in judgment. She didn't intend to kill her son. She didn't act with malice. She acted with the misplaced confidence that her car's technology would keep her children safe, and that confidence, coupled with an unfamiliar vehicle feature, led to unimaginable tragedy. Over the following days, the prosecution systematically built their case. They called witness after witness, presented video after video, document after document. On day 2, spa employee Isabel Korean described finding Maya sitting calmly in the car with Amillio in her lap, showing no urgency despite the baby's obvious distress. The detective who conducted the temperature recreation testified about the rapid heat buildup, showing the jury exactly how deadly the conditions became. Nurses from Adventist Health described Amillio's condition when he arrived, painting a vivid picture of a child whose body had been cooked from the inside out. On day 3, the forensic pathologist detailed the autopsy findings, explaining exactly how hyperthermia kills, how the brain swells and the organs fail when body temperature exceeds survivable limits. Detectives presented the spa surveillance footage, showing the jury Maya's prolonged stay, her repeated watch checks, her positioning in a seat facing away from the parking lot windows. But it was day 4 that delivered what many saw as the prosecution's most damaging evidence. First came testimony from the spa's aesthetics injector, who clarified that the procedure wasn't lip fillers but a liquid Brazilian butt lift, reinforcing the prosecution's narrative about vanity. She confirmed the procedure lasted only 15 to 20 minutes and that she had never been told there were children in the car, despite Maya having texted about bringing them inside beforehand. Over the course of 4 trial days in early December 2025, the jury heard from a parade of witnesses. They saw surveillance footage of Maya in the spa lobby, checking her Apple Watch between 2:05 and 3:45 p.m., a device that displayed the time on its front screen, contradicting her earlier claim that she'd left her phone in the car and didn't know how long she'd been inside. They heard from the forensic pathologist who compared Amillio's ordeal to being trapped inside a greenhouse, with UV light entering and heating everything in the closed space. Then came the video that the defense had been dreading: Maya's police interviews. They watched both of Maya's police interviews, the first where she appeared subdued and confused, the second where she sobbed and admitted her awareness of hot car dangers. They learned that in Maya's trunk, investigators found an unused stroller, a stroller that could have transported both children safely into the air-conditioned spa. They saw her break down when told Amillio was dead, sobbing, "He's dead? He's dead," in genuine shock and grief. But they also heard her acknowledge that she knew what could happen and did it anyway, thinking it wouldn't happen to her. The prosecution used this to argue consciousness of risk. She knew. She did it anyway. That's implied malice. The defense used it to argue human fallibility. She knew intellectually, but humans are notoriously bad at assessing personal risk. She genuinely didn't think it would happen, not because she didn't care, but because she was young and made a catastrophic error in judgment. They saw the text messages where Maya asked if she could bring her kids inside, and the spa's affirmative response welcoming them. They heard testimony that when Maya ran back into the spa holding Amillio's limp body, she stood in the doorway of the treatment room and cried out, "My baby." And they heard from a Bakersfield police officer who testified that at the scene, Maya appeared calm and neutral, though the defense challenged why this observation wasn't in his initial report, and the officer admitted his description came from watching body camera footage before testifying, not from his observations in the moment. And on December 15, 2025, day 5 of the trial, the courtroom heard directly from Maya Hernandez herself. The decision for a defendant to testify is always fraught with risk. Every word can be dissected, every emotion scrutinized, every inconsistency magnified. But for Maya Hernandez, perhaps the risk of silence was greater. When Maya took the stand, tears were already streaming down her face. For several hours, under the careful guidance of her attorney Terrell Wakeman, she tells her story in her own words, a story of a young mother overwhelmed, a tragic miscalculation, and a moment that would haunt her forever. Wakeman began gently, walking Maya through her background. She spoke of her challenging upbringing, growing up in difficult circumstances. At 20 years old, she was living in Visalia, working full-time as a certified nursing assistant, the sole provider for her 2 young sons. The boy's father was incarcerated at the time, facing charges related to an alleged domestic violence incident involving Maya herself. Despite everything, Maya testified, she'd poured her heart into her children. Both Amillio and Mateo were full-term births with no complications. She'd breastfed Mateo for 7 to 8 months and Amillio for about 4 months before she had to return to work. Family photographs were shown to the jury, images of Maya smiling with her boys, holding them, caring for them. Evidence, the defense argued, of her dedication as a mother. Then Wakeman guided her to June 29, 2025. That morning in Visalia, Maya testified she and the boys had breakfast together. Fruit cups and bananas, simple, normal. She packed them into her Toyota Corolla Hybrid and began the drive to Bakersfield for her appointment. A cosmetic procedure she admitted was not medically necessary, but purely for appearance. A liquid Brazilian butt lift. When they arrived at the spa, the boys were sleeping. Maya made the decision that would cost Amillio his life. She left them in their car seats. She gave each child 1 bottle of milk, but no water, and some food. She propped up her phone for Mateo to watch videos. She started the car, set the air conditioning to around 60 degrees, and placed the keys under the seat. "I believed they were asleep and would be safe," Maya testified, her voice breaking. "I intentionally left the car running with the AC set low. I assumed it would stay on during my absence." She admitted she had a double stroller in the trunk but never used it. The spa staff had told her children were allowed in the waiting area, but she didn't mention having kids in the car. When asked why, she explained that she doesn't tell people everything about her life. Inside the spa, Maya waited and waited. The procedure itself took only 15 to 20 minutes, but there were delays. She received text updates about the backup, but never mentioned the children waiting outside. She never expressed urgency. She was inside for approximately 2.5 hours. When she finally returned to the car, the nightmare was immediate. Amillio was unresponsive, purple, foam coming from his mouth. Mateo was hot, sweaty, lethargic. And then Maya revealed something that would become a crucial detail. She didn't call 911 immediately. She waited 6 to 7 minutes. During that time, she frantically attempted CPR. The recording of her 911 call, played earlier in the trial, captured her desperate voice as she spoke to dispatchers, still attempting to save her baby. Under Wakeman's gentle questioning, Maya repeatedly insisted she'd believed the boys would be okay, that they'd be safe with the AC running. "I only realized the full dangers after the incident," she said. But then came the cross-examination. Prosecutor Stephanie Tacconi approached the witness stand, her questions sharp and unrelenting. She walked Maya through a litany of risks, dangers that any reasonable person, let alone a trained CNA, should have considered. When asked whether she had considered the general harm to her children from being unattended for over 2 hours, she said, "I didn't think of all those things." Tacconi pressed harder. Maya had admitted in her police interview that she knew hot car deaths were dangerous. She'd heard the news stories. She had CNA training that covered heat-related illnesses and the vulnerability of young children. So why didn't she think of these things? "Probably a lot was going on in my head." Maya responded weakly. She acknowledged that she had failed both Amillio and Mateo. She had failed to protect them from danger. She had failed to consider the risks. She had failed to bring them into the air-conditioned lobby. She had failed to check on them for 2.5 hours. But was it murder? Or was it, as the defense maintained, a terrible, awful mistake? After Maya's testimony concluded, the defense briefly recalled lead detective Kyle McNabb for clarification on some of her prior statements. Then both sides rested their cases. The judge read jury instructions to prepare for closing arguments. The courtroom fell quiet. The evidence was in. The testimony complete. All that remained was for the attorneys to make their final appeals to the 12 people who would decide Maya Hernandez's fate. As of December 17, 2025, closing arguments were scheduled to begin. The trial that began on December 8th had moved swiftly through testimony, evidence, and Maya's emotional appearance on the stand. Soon, the jury would retire to deliberate. Maya Hernandez faces the possibility of 15 years to life in prison if convicted of second-degree murder. If the jury accepts the defense's argument and convicts only on the lesser charges of involuntary manslaughter and child endangerment, charges the defense has already conceded, she could face as little as 2 to 4 years. But regardless of the legal outcome, certain truths remain inescapable. Amillio Gutierrez died at 1 year and 20 days old because he was left strapped in a car seat in 116-degree heat while his mother socialized in an air-conditioned spa for over 2 hours. She had been told she could bring her children inside. She had a stroller in her trunk. She had options. She chose not to use them. Whether that choice rises to the level of murder or merely manslaughter is for the jury to decide. But that it was a choice, a series of choices, each one deepening the tragedy, no one disputes.
And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you, as you listen to the evidence over the next couple of days, keep some things in mind. One, there are no accidents here. There are no accidents in this case. This isn't a case of a forgotten child whose mom was in a hurry. These were intentional actions done willfully by the defendant. Keep in mind also that we are here because of choices. Choices made by the defendant. Choices made to leave her children in the car. Choices made to put her appearance before her children.
The question the jury must answer is whether those choices, made with knowledge of the risks, with alternatives available, with time passing minute by minute on a watch she checked repeatedly, constitute not just negligence, not just recklessness, but implied malice. Whether Maya Hernandez, in choosing to leave her children in that car, acted with such conscious disregard for human life that it crosses the line into murder. As the jury prepares to deliberate, they face a question that goes beyond the legal elements of murder versus manslaughter. They must decide whether Maya Hernandez's actions on June 29, 2025, crossed the line from tragic negligence into conscious disregard for human life. Did she knowingly gamble with her children's lives when she chose vanity over safety? When she sat in that lobby for 2 hours, chatting about 4th of July plans while her sons suffered yards away? When she chose a seat facing away from the window where she couldn't see her car? Or was she a young, overwhelmed mother who truly believed her vehicle would keep her children safe, who expected to be gone for 15 minutes, who made a series of poor decisions that culminated in unimaginable horror, but who never intended for her baby to die?
And ladies and gentlemen, at the end of this case, after you have heard all of the evidence, I will have another opportunity to come up here and speak with you. And at that time, I'm going to ask you to consider the defendant's actions, the defendant's choices.
The prosecution has asked the jury to tell Maya Hernandez that there are consequences to her choices, to find her guilty of second-degree murder and child endangerment, to hold her accountable for choosing her appearance over her sons. The defense has asked the jury to see this for what it truly is, not murder, but a terrible, awful mistake made by a barely 20-year-old mother who will live with the consequences of that day for the rest of her life. Whether that death was murder or manslaughter is now in the hands of 12 jurors who must weigh the evidence, the testimony, the surveillance footage, and the admissions, and render a verdict that will determine Maya Hernandez's fate. As of this recording, the trial is ongoing. The jury has not yet deliberated, and the question remains, where is the line between a terrible mistake and murder?